Welcome to Scaring YouTube channel. Today's chilling tale. A story of curiosity gone terribly wrong. We've all heard whispers of the dark web, that hidden side of the internet where anonymity allows the most unthinkable activities to thrive. But what happens when someone digs too deep? When curiosity crosses a line and leads to an encounter that forever changes their life? What you're about to hear is a true story. An account so disturbing it will make you question just how safe we really are behind our screens. This is not for the faint of heart, and listener discretion is advised. Before going into the story, please subscribe to my channel. I get motivated to make scaring and horror stories. The descent begins. Lucas was an ordinary guy, early 30s, tech-savvy, a little too adventurous for his own good. He wasn't a hacker, but he was skilled enough with computers to make him confident, sometimes too confident. His interest in the dark web started as casual curiosity, but over time, that curiosity grew into an obsession. One late night, as he browsed through a tech forum, he stumbled upon a discussion about the dark web that caught his attention. There were warnings about its dangers, stories of illegal activities, and some very dark corners that most people should never see. But there was also an air of intrigue. The forum users described it as a place of limitless possibilities, where you could find anything for the right price. Drugs, guns, fake IDs, you name it. But it wasn't the illegal marketplace that piqued Lucas's interest. It was the constant mention of something more sinister. Hidden communities, encrypted conversations, and forums that discuss things far worse than black market goods. His curiosity got the best of him. The more he read, the more he was drawn into the idea of exploring these hidden depths. After all, he thought, how bad could it really be? Equipped with his Tor browser and a VPN for extra protection, Lucas took his first steps into the unknown. The initial experience wasn't as dark as he expected. Sure, there were marketplaces selling drugs and counterfeit goods, but it didn't feel too different from the sketchy parts of the regular web. He spent hours scrolling through various forums, lurking in chat rooms, and getting the hang of navigating this strange new digital world. But it was on his third night of exploration that things took a darker turn. After browsing through several innocuous-looking sites, Lucas came across something different, a link that led to a site called Obsidian Dreams. The name was cryptic, and there was no description, but he clicked on it. Immediately, a warning popped up. Members only. Proceed with caution. Lucas smirked. It was exactly the kind of challenge he was looking for. But it wasn't as simple as signing up with an email. No. Obsidian Dreams required you to answer a series of riddles. These weren't ordinary puzzles, though. They were designed to mess with your mind. Questions that touched on morality, suffering, and fear. It took Lucas hours to finally crack the code. Once he did, the site granted him access, but what he found that would haunt him forever. Obsidian Dreams. The Obsidian Dreams forum was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its members shared disturbing content, photos, stories, and videos that couldn't be found anywhere else. But it wasn't just the illegal nature of the content that was disturbing. It was the atmosphere. These people didn't just share images or videos. They discussed them with a level of detachment that made Lucas feel sick. There was no shock, no horror, just cold fascination with human suffering. One of the threads that immediately caught Lucas's eye was titled, The Red Room Invitation. He had heard of Red Rooms before, alleged live streams where people were tortured and murdered for the viewing pleasure of those willing to pay. Most dismissed them as urban legends, but this thread was different. It wasn't speculative. It was filled with comments from users who claimed to have watched these live events. Lucas felt a strange mix of horror and fascination. Could something like that really exist? He kept scrolling through the thread, reading the cryptic comments. Some spoke in code. Others directly referenced past shows. The more he read, the more his curiosity deepened. Despite the pit forming in his stomach, he couldn't stop himself. He had to know more. One night, while lurking in the thread, Lucas received a direct message from a user named Master of Shadows. The message was simple. You've been watching. Are you ready to see for yourself? His heart raced. For a moment, he considered closing the browser, deleting everything and walking away. But the message felt like a challenge, and Lucas had never been one to back down from those. The invitation, he replied, and within moments, Master of Shadows responded with an encrypted link. The message was clear: this is not for the weak. Do not click unless you are truly ready. Lucas hesitated, but eventually clicked the link. His screen flickered, going black for several seconds. Then, a live stream appeared. The camera showed a dimly lit room, its walls lined with plastic sheets. In the center of the room, a single metal chair stood bolted to the floor. A man was tied to it, gagged and blindfolded. He was shaking, his chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. His terror was palpable. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be staged. But the fear in the man's movements told a different story. A figure in a black mask entered the frame, walking slowly, deliberately. The silence was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, the figure approached the camera, leaning in close. Through a distorted voice, they spoke. "Welcome, Lucas. We've been expecting you." Lucas's blood ran cold. His stomach dropped. How did they know his name? His real name? He had never used his real identity anywhere, let alone on the dark web. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. He thought about closing the browser, shutting everything down, but before he could move, the horror on screen escalated. The masked figure turned back to the man in the chair, pulling out a blade. Lucas couldn't tear his eyes away. What followed was an act of violence so horrific, so brutal, that it shook Lucas to his core. He slammed his laptop shut, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. But it didn't end there. The aftermath. Over the next few days, Lucas tried to forget what he had seen. He deleted the Tor browser, cleared his computer of any traces of the dark web, and promised himself he'd never go back. But the damage had already been done. It started with strange emails, random strings of letters and numbers at first, but then they became more personal. Photos of his house, taken from outside, looking in. Someone was watching him. He tried to ignore it, hoping it was some elaborate prank, but the situation worsened. One night, Lucas found a USB stick left on his doorstep. His heart pounded as he plugged it into his laptop. What he found on that drive shattered any remaining sense of security. The files contained videos, footage of him, recorded through his own webcam. They had been watching him the whole time. Panic set in. He called the police, but they couldn't help. Without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. He moved to a new apartment, changed his name, even went off the grid for a while, but the paranoia never left. Lucas knew he could never escape. He was trapped in the consequences of his curiosity, forever haunted by the knowledge that somewhere, deep in the shadows, they were still watching. Thank you for joining me for this horrifying true story. The dark web is not a place to explore lightly. Lucas's story is a terrifying reminder that some things are better left alone. And once you've seen the darkness, it might never stop watching you. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, especially with those who might be tempted to explore the dark web themselves. Stay safe out there, and remember, some doors, once open, can never be closed. Welcome to Scaring YouTube channel, where the eerie and unexplained come to life. If you love real ghost stories, spine-chilling encounters, and tales that will make you question the world around you, then you're in the right place. Today's story is one that has haunted a small town for decades and is known as the Haunting of Willow Creek. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey into the unknown. This is not just a tale. It's a real-life encounter that still terrifies those who dare to speak of it. Before going to the story, please subscribe to my channel. I get motivated to make more scaring and horror stories for all of you guys. Let's the story begin. It was the summer of 1978 in a small, forgotten town in the Midwest. Nestled deep in the woods, far from the bustling cities, was Willow Creek. The town, though quaint and peaceful, carried with it a dark history that many of its residents chose to ignore. At the center of it all stood the Willow Creek Manor, a towering Victorian house that had been abandoned for decades. The town folklore spoke of tragedy and sorrow, but few knew the full story or dared to speak of it. That summer, a group of 4 friends, led by 19-year-old Sarah Miller, decided to explore the manor. Sarah had always been fascinated by the supernatural, and while her friends weren't as keen, they agreed to go with her as a summer thrill. The group consisted of Sarah, her best friend Jess, Jess's boyfriend Mike, and their friend Peter. They planned to go in the late afternoon, just before sunset, to explore and perhaps catch a glimpse of the rumored ghost that haunted the place. As they approached the house, the once beautiful Victorian mansion stood in eerie disrepair. The windows were shattered, the paint was peeling, and the overgrown garden seemed to reach for the house like twisted fingers. The air around them felt heavy, as if the very ground they walked on was soaked with the memories of what had happened inside. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing the dark interior. Dust swirled in the fading sunlight, and the temperature inside dropped immediately. Mike, who had been the most skeptical, joked about how cliché the situation was, but his laughter was quickly stifled by an eerie silence that seemed to swallow the house whole. Even the usual sounds of the forest outside, birds, insects, had disappeared. As they explored the house, the group noticed odd things. There were cold spots in certain rooms, as if someone or something was standing there watching. Jess swore she saw shadows darting past doorways, but no one else could confirm it. Peter began to feel uneasy, insisting they should leave, but Sarah urged them on. She had brought a tape recorder, hoping to capture evidence of spirits. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, Sarah set the recorder on a dusty dresser and began asking questions. "Is anyone here with us? Do you want to communicate?" They waited in silence, but nothing happened. Just as they were about to give up, they heard a faint noise, like whispering. Everyone froze. They replayed the recording, and there it was. A voice. No, several voices, overlapping, whispered something unintelligible. But Sarah, always the curious one, believed it was a sign they were making contact. Despite Mike and Peter's growing anxiety, Sarah wanted to continue. They made their way to the attic, which was rumored to be the most haunted part of the house. The stairs leading to the attic were steep and narrow, and as they climbed, the sense of dread grew stronger. At the top, they found a small, circular room with a single, broken window. In the center of the room was an old, weathered rocking chair that seemed out of place. Jess remarked how strange it was, and as soon as the words left her mouth, the chair began to rock, slowly at first, then faster, as if someone invisible was sitting in it. The group panicked. Mike grabbed Jess's arm, and Peter began shouting at Sarah to leave. But Sarah was mesmerized. Her eyes were fixed on the chair, and she whispered, "Do you see that?" The temperature in the room plummeted, and suddenly, the door to the attic slammed shut. They were trapped. Then came the sound. It was a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the walls, followed by the unmistakable creak of footsteps coming from the hallway below. Something, or someone, was coming up the stairs. The 4 friends huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. The footsteps stopped just outside the attic door, and then the handle began to turn, slowly. Peter grabbed the nearest object, a rusted crowbar that had been lying in the corner, and braced himself. But when the door swung open, no one was there. Just as they thought they were safe, Jess screamed. Behind them, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure. It was a woman, dressed in tattered Victorian clothing, her face pale and gaunt, with hollow, black eyes. She pointed at Sarah and mouthed something, though no sound came out. The air in the room became suffocating, and the friends scrambled for the stairs. They didn't stop running until they were out of the house, panting and drenched in sweat. Once they were outside, they turned to look back at the house. From the attic window, the ghostly woman stared down at them, her hollow eyes following them as they fled into the woods. For weeks after the incident, the friends were haunted by nightmares. Sarah, who had been the most intrigued, was the worst off. She claimed to hear the woman's voice in her head, whispering strange and cryptic things. Objects in her house would move on their own, and doors would slam in the middle of the night. Eventually, Sarah sought out a local historian to learn more about the house. What she discovered chilled her to the bone. The woman they had seen was believed to be Elizabeth Cartwright, the original owner of Willow Creek Manor. In the late 1800s, Elizabeth had lost her young daughter, Annabelle, to a mysterious illness. Grief-stricken and desperate, Elizabeth had turned to dark rituals in an attempt to bring her daughter back. But something went horribly wrong. Neighbors reported hearing screams coming from the house one night, and the next day, Elizabeth was found dead in the attic, her body contorted and eyes blackened. From that day on, the house was cursed. Anyone who dared to enter was said to hear the cries of Annabelle or see the tormented spirit of Elizabeth, forever searching for her lost child. Sarah and her friends had made contact with Elizabeth, and in doing so, had awakened something that had been lying dormant for over a century. Though they never returned to Willow Creek Manor, the terror stayed with them. To this day, the house remains abandoned, a decaying monument to the tragedy that unfolded within its walls. If you ever find yourself in that small, forgotten town, the locals will warn you, stay away from Willow Creek Manor, because once you enter, you might not come back the same. Thank you for joining us for this bone-chilling tale. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more true ghost stories and supernatural encounters. And remember, sometimes the scariest places are those that hold the memories of the past. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and above all, stay out of the dark places where spirits may linger. Welcome, everyone, to another chilling tale that will leave you questioning the line between the living and the dead. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey to a place where the veil between this world and the next is thin too thin. Prepare yourself for one of the most unsettling ghost stories you've ever heard. Dim the lights, settle in, and listen closely as we explore the haunting of Greystone Manor. Before going to the story, please subscribe to my channel. I get motivated to make more scary and horror story. The story begins. Greystone Manor had always been a grand estate, built in the late 1800s. The sprawling mansion sat on a remote cliffside, its Gothic architecture standing in stark contrast to the wild landscape that surrounded it. For over a century, the manor had been passed down through generations of the same family, the Eldridges. But as beautiful as the estate was, rumors swirled that something sinister had been lurking within its walls almost since the day it was built. It was said that Mary Eldridge, the youngest daughter of the original owners, had mysteriously vanished one stormy night in 1892. The family claimed she had run away, desperate to escape an arranged marriage to a wealthy older man. But locals whispered a different story, one far darker. They believed that Mary had discovered a family secret, one that, in the wrong hands, could have brought ruin to the Eldridges. Some claimed that in her efforts to expose the truth, she had been silenced forever. Her body was never found, and the family remained tight-lipped about her disappearance. Years went by, and Greystone Manor earned a reputation. Strange lights were seen flickering in the windows at night, when no one was home. Unexplained noises, footsteps, whispers, even faint sobbing, were reported by visitors and staff alike. But these strange occurrences never quite reached the point of being more than an eerie story until the summer of 1954. That year, the last remaining member of the Eldridge family, Edward, sold the manor to a wealthy businessman named Charles Peterson. Peterson had grand plans to turn Greystone Manor into an exclusive hotel, capitalizing on its isolated beauty and historical charm. He invested heavily in restoring the mansion to its former glory, hiring a crew of over a dozen workers to live on the property while they completed the renovations. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly, but as the weeks wore on, strange incidents began to happen. Tools went missing, and the workers heard strange sounds at night, whispers and creaking footsteps, despite the mansion being completely empty after dark. One of the workers, a a man named David, claimed he saw a figure in one of the upper windows, a pale woman with dark hair, staring out at him with hollow eyes. He rushed inside to investigate, but when he reached the room, it was empty and the air was unnaturally cold. David was a practical man, not easily shaken, but this experience left him rattled. He wasn't the only one. Over the following weeks, more and more workers reported strange sightings. Shadows that moved on their own, doors that slammed shut without warning, and cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. But the most disturbing incident happened to one of the younger workers, a man named Tom. Late one night, after most of the crew had gone to bed, Tom heard the faint sound of a woman's voice coming from the ballroom. Thinking one of his co-workers was playing a prank on him, he grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the sound. As he entered the ballroom, the air grew colder, and the voice became clearer, a soft, sad whisper repeating the same phrase over and over, "Find me, find me." Tom froze. He could see his breath in the air, the temperature now impossibly low for a summer night. As he turned to leave, the flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through him as he fumbled for his lighter, trying to strike a flame. But before he could, something touched him, a light, icy touch on his arm, followed by a cold breath against his neck. He spun around, his heart racing, but saw nothing. In the distance, the whispering continued. Terrified, Tom ran back to his room, packed his bags, and left the estate the next morning. He never returned. Word quickly spread through the town, and the workers began to leave one by one, refusing to stay another night in the haunted manor. Charles Peterson, desperate to finish the renovations, hired a new crew, but they too experienced the strange occurrences. No one would stay long enough to complete the project. In a last-ditch effort, Peterson contacted a well-known paranormal investigator, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, who had a reputation for solving some of the most baffling cases of hauntings. Dr. Hayes arrived at Greystone Manor with her assistant, planning to spend 3 nights in the mansion. She set up equipment throughout the house, cameras, EVP recorders, thermal sensors, and waited for nightfall. The first night was quiet. There were no disturbances, and Dr. Hayes began to wonder if the stories were exaggerated. But on the second night, as she reviewed the footage from the previous evening, something caught her eye. In the dining room camera, there was a flicker of movement, something pale and shadowy drifting across the screen. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Intrigued, Dr. Hayes decided to focus her investigation on the dining room. That night, as she sat in the darkened room, asking questions into the empty air, her EVP recorder picked up a response. A faint, almost inaudible whisper. "Help me." Dr. Hayes' heart raced. "Who are you?" she asked. For several moments, there was silence. Then, just as she was about to give up, the whisper returned. "Mary." Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. The candles she had lit flickered and went out. Dr. Hayes felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow, as if the weight of a century's worth of grief had settled on her shoulders. She asked one final question. "What do you want?" There was a long pause before the answer came, this time clearer than before. "Find me." That night, Dr. Hayes dreamed of Mary Eldridge. In the dream, she saw the young woman standing in a hidden room behind the manor's library, her eyes wide with fear. When Dr. Hayes woke the next morning, she was convinced she had seen something real. She immediately went to the library and began searching for a hidden passage. After hours of searching, she found it, an old, dusty door concealed behind a bookcase. Inside the hidden room, Dr. Hayes made a grisly discovery. The remains of a young woman, her skeletal hand clutching a locket with the initials Emmy engraved on it. It was Mary Eldridge. The story became clear. Mary had been murdered, her body hidden away to keep the family's dark secret from being exposed. But her spirit had never left. After Mary's remains were given a proper burial, the hauntings at Greystone Manor ceased. Charles Peterson was finally able to complete the renovations, and the manor was opened as a hotel the following year. But those who stay there say that on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the faint sound of a woman's voice whispering from the shadows. Thank you. And there you have it, the tragic and haunting tale of Greystone Manor. It's said that once a restless spirit finds peace, they leave our world behind. But in the case of Mary Eldridge, perhaps her gratitude keeps her close to the place she called home for so many years. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is it possible for a spirit to linger even after they found peace? Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe out there. You never know what might be watching you from the shadows.